Her face tightened before her body even moved. Eyes wide, jaw set, breath caught halfway in. The street stretched long ahead of her, pale concrete burning under noon light, neat lawns, white fences. Parked cars that suddenly felt like obstacles instead of shelter. Her arms drove forward fast but controlled. Not panic yet. Control. Behind her, heavy boots slapped pavement. The sound came in uneven bursts, too close. Too loud, too certain. A sharp command cut the air from behind, blurred by distance and speed. She did not turn. Her shoulders pulled inward as if trying to make herself smaller without slowing down. Muscles burned along her ribs. Sweat streaked down the bridge of her nose. The world narrowed to a thin tunnel of road and breath. On the sidewalk, a woman froze mid-step. A man's watering hose arced uselessly into empty space. Curtains shifted behind living room windows. Something was wrong, and everyone felt it. A block behind her, the officer surged forward, jaw clenched, eyes locked only on her back. His free hand chopped at the air as he ran. The other held steady weight. Metal glinted. The gun rose higher as his arm straightened. She sensed it without seeing. The pressure in her chest changed. A sudden heaviness pulled at her spine. Her pace faltered for half a heartbeat. That single hesitation nearly ended everything. A second officer appeared farther back, struggling to keep distance from the lead. His movements were stiff with urgency but uncertain, like he was catching up to a decision already made without him. The wind tore strands of hair across her face. Her lips parted as oxygen came harder now. The distance to the corner felt impossible, too long, too exposed. Her mind raced far ahead of her body. If she tripped here, there would be no time to recover. Her hands curled tighter, nails cutting into her palms. The street offered nowhere to hide. Behind her, the armed officer closed another step. His breathing grew louder, faster. His confidence rose with every foot he gained. People were no longer just watching. They were bracing. Her expression hardened. Fear sharpened into something quieter, colder. Endurance, something heavy settled into her eyes. She did not scream. She did not plead. She ran. And just as the distance between them collapsed to a final dangerous measure, the mistake was already locked in motion. Neither of them yet understood that this chase was no longer about escape. It was about exposure. Her breathing began to fracture. Each inhale arrived shallow now, sharp against the back of her throat. Her stride shortened without permission. Calves tightened. A dull tremor crept into her knees. The street blurred at the edges. The officer behind her felt the shift immediately. He leaned forward harder, hunger entering his posture. His jaw moved as if chewing on a decision already made. The certainty in his eyes locked in tighter. To him, the situation had simplified. Runner, target, threat. Nothing else mattered. His conclusion had already erased her humanity. She darted left toward a narrow side road, hoping for shade, cover, something that disrupted the open stretch of exposure. Her shoes scraped at a bad angle. The sound snapped too loud against the quiet neighborhood. A child on a bicycle froze at the corner. A dog barked from behind a fence and then went silent. The air thickened. Her shoulders dipped as she pushed through the turn. The movement cost her momentum. The gap behind her shrank again. She could feel it. The space she needed was being swallowed. Her heartbeat climbed into her ears, heavy and fast. With every pounding echo, a quiet question repeated inside her chest. Why are they chasing me like this? The answer refused to surface. Her face tightened further. Confusion pressed into fear. Fear slid into helplessness. She had run before. She had trained before, but this was different. This wasn't pursuit. This was judgment in motion. Behind her, the lead officer's pace sharpened. His finger settled against the curve of metal now, no longer floating. His arm steadied. His posture straightened as if he were no longer chasing but preparing. The street narrowed into a funnel of pressure. The second officer shouted something from farther back, his voice strained, fringed with hesitation. The words spilled apart in the wind, arriving too broken to mean anything. The lead officer did not slow. Whatever doubt existed behind him no longer reached him. She risked one glance over her shoulder. For a split second their eyes aligned. What she saw was not rage, it was certainty, cold, final. Her stomach dropped as if she'd lost the ground beneath her. Her stride buckled just slightly, long enough to tell her what she already felt. She was no longer being chased to be stopped. She was being chased to be ended. Her chest burned. A thin, silent endurance took over where panic failed. Her face went still, her eyes hardened. If this was going to happen, it would not happen with her begging. She drove forward again. She did not yet know that someone else had already started recording. The backyard fences ahead rose higher. The road tightened into a narrow corridor of trapped space. No cross streets, no quick exits, only straight forward, only closing footsteps, only the sound of metal moving behind her. By the time she reached the end of this road, the story of who she was had already been silently rewritten by someone else. The neighborhood had stopped pretending this was normal. Front doors remained closed, but presence leaked through every crack. Curtains trembled. Window blinds lifted a fraction higher than before. A woman stood frozen behind a glass pane, one hand covering her mouth. A teenager on a porch slowly raised a phone without fully understanding why. The street itself felt like it was holding its breath. Her steps grew uneven as fatigue crept deeper into her legs. The rhythm she had built began to betray her. The road no longer felt flat beneath her feet. Every slab of concrete struck harder. She felt the burn along her spine now, not pain, pressure, the kind that forces the body to choose between collapse and survival. Behind her, the officer's boots struck in full control. His posture remained steady, almost practiced. The chase had stripped the situation down to something simple in his mind. Movement ahead, authority behind. Everything else had melted away. His shadow stretched longer across the pavement as the distance narrowed. The glint of metal lifted again with practiced ease. The weapon aligned not with panic but with decision. The second officer lagged farther behind now. His breathing shook his posture. His steps were scattered. He looked not only at the runner but at the gun in front of him. His face tightened with conflict. Something inside him was slipping out of formation. Her arms began to feel heavier than before. The swing of each one took more effort than the last. Her shoulders dipped lower with every stride. The street narrowed further. Hedges rose on both sides now. Cars lined the curb. The open escape of the wider road was gone. Her throat tightened. She scanned ahead quickly. No open yards, no pass-through gates, no corner to cut sharply enough. Only a long, clean corridor of nowhere to disappear. Her face shifted, not to panic, to calculation. She began to run with intention, not desperation. Behind her, the lead officer's jaw flexed. His confidence no longer rose gradually, it surged. His steps shortened for speed. His breathing grew quieter as his focus deepened. He no longer shouted. He no longer warned. The language of command had ended. Now there was only action. The recording phones along the street lifted higher. 2, then 3. A man leaned out of a truck window, eyes wide, torn between fear and disbelief. The atmosphere thickened into something electric. This was no longer a chase between two people. This was a confrontation being witnessed. And witnesses change outcomes. Her foot clipped something small, a loose stone, a broken edge of pavement. Her body jolted forward. The stumble was brief. She caught herself. But the officer behind her surged in response. The space between them collapsed to a dangerous closeness now. Her breath broke fully. Her endurance began to crack. Just as the street filled with watching eyes, her body started to betray her at the worst possible moment. Her breathing lost its rhythm. What had been controlled became jagged. Short pulls of air scraped through her throat now, sharp enough to sting. Each inhale felt smaller than the last. Her chest tightened as if something invisible were wrapping around it. Her stride shortened again, not by choice, by limit. The alley of parked cars closed tighter around her path. Mirrors blurred past her peripheral vision. Metal and glass and paint compressed the world into a narrow tunnel with no soft edges left. The street had reshaped itself into a cage. Her shoulders rocked slightly with fatigue. Sweat traced down the side of her face, stinging into her eyes. She blinked hard but did not slow. Blinking cost time now. Her hands trembled as they cut forward through the air. Her fingers no longer curled tight. They shook with each push. Behind her, the lead officer felt the change. He recognized the weakening cadence immediately. His posture lifted with confidence that bordered on relief. The chase was aging in his favor now. His arm remained raised, metal steady, aim tightening with every step he gained. To him, the ending was already chosen. The second officer drifted farther behind. His breaths came loud and uneven. His head moved again between the runner and the weapon in front of him. His form was no longer aligned with command. It showed in his hesitation. It showed in the way his stride faltered on every decision he did not fully agree with. Her eyes flicked forward. The end of the road revealed itself at last. A dead end. A tall wooden fence sealed the far side. Weathered boards rose shoulder to shoulder. No gate, no gap, only vertical escape where horizontal had vanished. Her chest dropped, not into panic, into cold understanding. There would be no running past this point. The atmosphere thickened instantly. Phones rose higher. A car door opened somewhere off to the side and never fully closed. The sound stayed suspended in the air like a held breath. Her pace surged for 3 final strides. Not because she believed she would escape, but because stopping early would mean surrendering the last piece of control she still had. Her foot struck loose gravel near the fence. Her body lurched forward again. This stumble ripped more energy from her than the fall itself. She caught herself. Barely. Behind her, boots thundered closer than at any moment before. The heat of his presence entered the space behind her back. The distance between them thinned to the width of air and intent. The chase had reached its edge. Her shoulders rose and fell once more. Her spine straightened slightly as if bracing for something unseen. Her endurance had not failed yet. But it was bending now, hard, with nowhere left to run and every eye watching. The next second would decide whether this was an arrest or something far worse. The fence towered in front of her like an unspoken verdict. Tall, solid, final. Her breath tore in and out of her chest now in jagged pulls. Her shoulders lifted high with each inhale. The muscles along her neck stood rigid beneath damp skin. She slowed, not because she chose to, because her body demanded it. The moment her speed dropped, the balance of power shifted fully. Her foot slid once against loose gravel. She caught herself again, but the hesitation lingered in the air longer than the stumble itself. It was enough. Behind her, the lead officer closed the last safe distance. His boots struck louder now, heavier, landing with the confidence of someone who no longer expected resistance. The gun stayed raised, steady, unforgiving. Her back straightened as she reached the fence. Her hands lifted slightly, unsure whether to touch the wood or keep them visible. Her chest trembled openly now. The air pressed thick against her lungs. She turned slowly. Every movement became a statement. Her face held no defiance, only breath, sweat, tension, and widening eyes. Across the street, the witnesses had gone completely still. Phones hovered at chest height, some hands shook. Others were frozen in perfect, silent focus. A woman near a driveway pressed both palms over her mouth. A man stiffened beside his truck, unable to look away. The space between officer and woman felt charged with a dangerous stillness. The officer's face hardened into something unreadable. His shoulders squared. His stance widened slightly now, weight planted for control. Authority filled his posture. Her arms hovered uncertainly beside her ribs. Her fingers spread open, trembling in the open air. Her legs shook with leftover momentum and rising fear. Her survival now depended entirely on interpretation. The second officer finally reached the narrowed end of the street. He slowed sharply when he saw the weapon fully trained. His breath hitched. His eyes flicked not to her but to the line of the gun. The atmosphere shifted, from speed to silence, from motion to judgment. Her eyes searched the officer's face for something that might soften the moment. They found nothing she could read. Fear did not burst, it settled, deep, quiet, public. Her humiliation began not in words but in stillness. Dozens of eyes bore into her now as if waiting for her to prove something she did not understand how to disprove. Her spine tightened further. Her chin lifted a fraction, not in rebellion but in instinctive dignity. Dignity sometimes rises right before everything collapses. The officer's finger tightened slightly along the metal. His breathing slowed as his decision condensed. The crowd leaned forward an inch in shared tension. The sun reflected off the barrel in a bright, blinding flash. With the gun steady and the entire street watching, the meaning of this moment was seconds away from being permanently defined. The silence shattered without warning. Not with a sound from the crowd, not with a scream, but with the sharp, clipped authority of instruction forced into the air. Her body responded before her mind could. Her shoulders jolted slightly. Her breathing stuttered mid-inhale. The invisible weight pressing on her chest suddenly doubled. Fear moved faster than thought. Her hands lifted higher now, palms open and trembling in full view. The movement was slow, exaggerated, careful, each inch upward measured like it could decide everything. Her knees shook as fatigue collided with adrenaline. The tremor moved through her legs in short, uncontrollable waves. She leaned back slightly to keep balance, eyes locked forward. The fence pressed cool and solid against her spine. She had nowhere else to lean. Across from her, the officer's posture tightened into its final shape. Feet planted, arms firm, weapon aligned with trained precision that erased any softness left in the moment. His face showed no heat now, only execution. The danger no longer felt emotional, it felt procedural. The second officer drifted a few steps to the side, uncertain where to place himself. His hands lifted halfway, unsure whether to mirror control or preparation. His eyes moved rapidly between the woman and his partner. Doubt flickered in his expression. The crowd stayed silent, too silent. The phones kept recording. The street felt like a courtroom without a judge yet. Her breathing rasped louder in the quiet. Each exhale shook at the edge. Sweat gathered along her temples and ran into her lashes. Her vision blurred slightly, but she forced it steady. Her face tightened into restraint, not panic, restraint. She was choosing control inside a moment designed to strip it from her. Her arms rose higher, her fingers spread wider. Her chest lifted and fell in uneven rhythm. To the eyes around her, she now looked exactly like the image the moment demanded. A stopped suspect, a failed runner, a figure frozen at the end of pursuit. But inside her, confusion tangled violently with fear. Why me? The thought struck sharp and sudden against her ribs. She had no weapon, no bag, no threat in her hands, only breath, only exhaustion, only the weight of everyone's assumption pressing inward. Assumptions harden faster than facts. The officer edged one slow step closer. The sound of his boot touching gravel rang louder than it should have. Her shoulders flinched at the noise. Her balance wavered again. A soft gasp slipped from her lips before she could stop it. Every phone caught it, every witness absorbed it. Her humiliation deepened without words. Her vulnerability was now fully public. The heat of the day pressed down harder. The air felt heavier with each second that stretched without resolution. The officer's breathing slowed even more. His shoulders relaxed into certainty. The ending he expected felt close now. Just as the moment tightened to its most fragile edge, something unseen began shifting far beyond this dead-end street. The crowd did not move, but something changed in how they stood. A subtle shift passed through the onlookers, weight leaning forward, breaths held deeper, phones adjusting angles as if instinctively searching for meaning inside the frame. Her face felt stiff now, muscles locked between fear and effort. Sweat traced uneven paths down her cheeks. Her lips parted slightly as air scraped in and out. Her arms remained raised, palms open. The fence pressed into the small of her back. Cold, unforgiving, she was physically pinned before anyone touched her. Across from her, the lead officer's posture held dominance, but something faint flickered beneath it. A thin tightening in his brow. A pause so short it barely existed. The second officer saw it. His own stance shifted fully now. His feet no longer mirrored pursuit. They angled away slightly, as if his body instinctively resisted where his ranking demanded obedience. His eyes returned to the woman's hands. Open, empty. His chest rose deeper this time. For the first time, the question entered the street. A murmur rippled faintly through the watching phones, not a shout, not a protest. Just uncertainty leaking out in quiet vibrations. Her shoulders trembled with the effort of holding her arms high. Fatigue pulled downward hard now. Her muscles vibrated with strain she could no longer fully control. Her jaw clenched tighter. Her eyes did not beg. They searched, somewhere in the circle of faces, for anything solid. The lead officer stepped closer again. His boot crushed gravel under weight. The sound echoed like punctuation. Every step now carried meaning. The second officer raised one hand uncertainly, not fully in command, not fully in restraint. His hesitation hovered like a weak signal trapped between two towers. The crowd felt it, the shift, the imbalance. The street no longer felt controlled. It felt suspended. Her breathing ragged harder, heat swelled in her chest. Confusion wrapped around fear and twisted tighter. Why is this still happening? Her fingers twitched involuntarily. The smallest movement, barely visible. But the lead officer's shoulders hardened instantly in response. His posture snapped back into rigid authority. The second officer froze. The gap between interpretation and reality shrank to nothing. The atmosphere sharpened again. Phones lifted higher. The woman near the driveway started to cry without sound. Her tears slid unseen behind trembling hands. Her humiliation deepened into something heavier now. Public misunderstanding, public vulnerability, public judgment suspended in air without verdict. The sun cut sharp lines across the pavement. The materials of the moment, wood, metal, gravel, glass, felt unnaturally vivid. The world was too clear, too loud in its quiet. A moment like this creates memories that never leave witnesses. The lead officer took one last tightening step forward, close enough now. Her breath hitched violently. Her shoulders jerked up another inch. Her strength thinned to a trembling thread. As both officers hovered between doubt and dominance, the smallest unseen detail was about to shift the entire balance of power. Her arms began to burn in quiet waves, not sharp pain. A slow, spreading fire that crept from her shoulders down into her wrists. Her palms tingled with numbness. The effort of staying still became heavier than the effort of running ever had. Her breath shook now without rhythm. In, out, pause, in again. Each cycle felt unstable. Stillness was becoming its own form of suffering. The fence behind her felt colder than before. The grain of the wood pressed uneven patterns through the thin fabric at her back. She leaned into it without realizing, as if trying to disappear into its surface. Her chin trembled once, then steadied. Across from her, the lead officer's dominance held, but no longer clean. His shoulders remained squared. His weapon remained raised. Yet the tiny delay after every breath signaled something new. Hesitation, just a hairline fracture in certainty. The second officer sensed it instantly. His chest rose deeper. His feet shifted again, more deliberately this time. He did not move closer. He stayed. Staying is sometimes a form of resistance. The crowd leaned in unconsciously. A ripple moved through the witnesses as one phone rose higher than the rest. A man near the hedge lifted his device fully above his head now, adjusting angle, framing everything. The light of the screen reflected faintly across the woman's face. Her eyes flicked toward it, just for half a second. Not hope, awareness. She was no longer alone in the moment. The moment was now being preserved. Her fingers twitched again, exhausted. The movement was small, involuntary. The kind that comes from muscle failure, not intention. The lead officer stiffened in response. But this time, his reaction arrived with fraction of a second delay. That delay did not go unnoticed. The second officer's eyes sharpened. He saw the open hands, the trembling arms. The empty space where threat should have been. Something shifted behind his eyes. Reality was pressing in through the cracks. Her breathing grew louder again. The sound bounced faintly off the fence and the parked cars. It felt exposed, too audible, as if her fear were echoing outward for the street to judge. Her humiliation deepened again, but now it mixed with silent endurance rather than collapse. Her gaze steadied forward. If this moment was going to define her, it would not define her as weak. The heat on the pavement intensified. Time stretched thicker than air. The lead officer took another half step forward, not fully committed, not fully withdrawn. Suspended between two decisions, power is loud until it starts to doubt itself. The crowd felt the hesitation. A ripple of tension moved outward, some faces tightened, some brows furrowed, some phones shook. Her arms dropped a fraction of an inch as the burns surged. She caught them and forced them back up with the last of her strength. Her jaw clenched so hard it trembled. Her eyes did not leave his. At the exact moment her body began to fail, the authority in front of her began to fracture. Her arms shook harder now. The tremor was no longer subtle. It moved visibly through her wrists, up through her forearms, into her shoulders. The fire inside her muscles spread outward, turning into dull, uncontrollable quivers. Her breathing stuttered again. In, out, too fast, too shallow. Her endurance was reaching its edge. Across from her, the lead officer watched the movement with sharpened focus. His stance tightened again, reflex pulling him back towards certainty. The fractional doubt that had crept in a moment earlier began to retreat beneath training and assumption. His finger curved tighter. Metal shifted with a faint, terrible sound. The second officer saw the change instantly. His chest tightened. His jaw flexed. He took a step forward without realizing he had decided to. Two instincts collided in the open air. The crowd felt it. A collective intake of breath moved through the street like a wave. Several phones jerked higher at once. Someone near the hedge whispered something too faint to be shaped into words. Her eyes widened slightly at the sound of metal moving. Fear surged again, not as panic, but as clarity. This was no longer misunderstanding. This was a point of no return approaching at measurable speed. Her knees shook violently now. The muscles beneath them fluttered with exhaustion. She pressed harder into the fence behind her for balance. Wood scraped faintly against fabric, too loud in the silence. Every small sound now felt like a trigger. Her lips parted again. No sound came out. Her throat felt locked around breath and fear and everything she could not say. Her chin lifted another fraction, not defiance, alignment. If she fell now, she would fall forward, into the moment, into every watching eye. The lead officer advanced one full step, close enough that the space between them no longer belonged to either of them alone. His shadow swallowed her feet. She flinched only slightly this time. Even flinching had become dangerous. The second officer raised his voice not as command but as interruption. The sound cracked with urgency and uncertainty. It did not carry authority, it carried resistance. The lead officer did not turn, his focus narrowed. The weapon remained steady. The crowd's stillness broke unevenly now. A few people shifted backward. A few leaned farther in. The air felt electrically unstable, as if the street itself were bracing. Her arms dropped another inch as strength drained completely. She fought them back up. Her hands shook violently. Her shoulders sagged under invisible weight. Her endurance was breaking. The image the street would remember was being formed right now. The sun flared once against the barrel in a sharp, blinding flash. Her eyes squinted reflexively. The moment froze, breath caught, sound vanished. The next second would decide whether this street witnessed a restraint or a tragedy. Time fractured. Not stopped, not sped. Broken into uneven pieces that no longer fit neatly together. Her breath caught halfway in. Her arms sagged another inch despite every command her body screamed at them. The shaking rolled through her shoulders in visible waves now. Not weakness of will, failure of muscle, failure of limit. Her body was surrendering even as her mind refused to. The lead officer's finger tightened further. The weapon steadied with terrifying precision. His shoulders lowered just enough to show commitment. Decision thickened in his posture. He was no longer chasing. He was concluding. The second officer lunged forward suddenly, not dramatically, not forcefully, just enough to break the rhythm. His hand shot outward, not toward the woman, but toward his partner's arm. He did not grab. He hovered there for a fraction of a second, unsure if crossing that final inch would be betrayal or duty. That hesitation nearly cost everything. The crowd erupted into sound all at once. Gasps, shattered whispers, a sharp cry from someone near the hedge. Phones trembled violently now, angles shifted, frames tilted. Focus ripped between two uniforms locked in conflict. Her eyes darted to the side for the first time. What she saw was not rescue, it was fracture. The unity of authority was breaking in front of her. Confusion slammed into her chest harder than fear ever had. The moment lost its clean, terrifying simplicity. It became unstable, unpredictable. Unpredictability is more dangerous than rage. The lead officer finally turned his head a fraction, just enough to acknowledge the interruption. His jaw tightened. His breathing spiked suddenly, sharp where it had been slow before. The second officer spoke again, louder this time, not in command. In warning, the words spilled fast. Alarm surged through them. Her arms dropped another inch. This time she could not stop it. Her palms burned as they dipped. The lead officer's focus snapped back to her instantly. His shadow shifted forward again. The moment recentered on her body. All rescue attempts collapsed back into danger. Her knees buckled for the first time, not fully, just enough to tell the truth. She was out of strength. Her back pressed harder into the fence as gravity tried to pull her downward. The wood vibrated faintly with the impact of her weight. The street seemed to lean inward. Every watching face tightened in shared shock. This was no longer pursuit. This was collapse, her chin lifted again by reflex, not pride, not defiance, alignment with whatever came next. The officer's breathing grew loud again, fast, uneven. His confidence wavered inside the tremor of conflict. When power hesitates under pressure, it often lashes out. The second officer finally made contact. His fingers brushed his partner's sleeve. Bare skin, bare friction, bare risk. The touch lasted less than a second, but it changed the shape of the moment. The lead officer recoiled half an inch without meaning to. The gun wavered, not much, enough. Her eyes widened. The crowd inhaled as one. For the first time since the chase began, the weapon no longer pointed with certainty, and that uncertainty was about to redraw the entire outcome. The weapon wavered, just once, just enough to be seen. Her breath ripped sharply into her lungs at the sight. Hope surged instinctively, dangerous, sudden, uninvited. It rose faster than her body could handle. Her arms slipped lower again as her shaking intensified. Not surrender, collapse. Hope arrived at the exact moment her strength disappeared. The lead officer felt the mistake instantly. The fracture in his confidence snapped hard in the opposite direction. His posture stiffened violently, overcorrecting. His arm locked. His grip tightened. Certainty returned, but now it was angry, embarrassed, threatened. The second officer froze mid-motion. He had crossed the invisible line, and now he didn't know how to undo it. Authority hates being interrupted. The crowd sensed the shift. The air turned sharp again, not electric, dangerous. Several people stepped backward unconsciously. One phone dropped slightly, then rose again in panic adjustment. Her knees finally gave way, not completely, but enough that her body sank several inches down the fence. The sound of wood creaked faintly under the new pressure. Her breathing broke into open gasps now. In, out, too fast, too loud, her body had reached open helplessness. The officer moved forward again. Not fast, not slow, deliberate. Each step landed with control that felt heavier than pursuit. His shadow climbed higher onto her legs, swallowing her silhouette inch by inch. She tried to lift her hands again. They barely moved. Her wrists trembled weakly in the open air. Her humiliation was now complete. Public, visible, undeniable. She was no longer a runner, no longer a subject of pursuit. She was a body failing under force she could not reason with. The street had shifted from tension into submission. The second officer spoke again, louder, sharper, urgent. This time the sound cut through the moment more clearly. But the lead officer did not turn, he did not listen, he advanced. Witnesses began to speak now, not shouting, not commanding, pleading. Someone cried out from behind a parked car. A voice cracked with fear, not accusation. Another rose closer to tears. Her vision blurred, not from emotion, from oxygen loss. Her chin dipped for the first time, her eyes lost their hard, fixed line. The moment stole even her last shield of dignity. The officer loomed fully over her now. She could see only uniform, only shadow, only weapon. Her spine pressed flat against the fence as far as it could go. There was nowhere left to collapse except inward. The second officer finally positioned himself fully between the street and the confrontation. Not between the weapon and her. Between the witnesses and what was about to happen. The street understood what that meant. This was no longer restraint. This was consequence. Her breath came in one shallow, broken pull. Her hands sagged helplessly at shoulder height. Her body could not pretend anymore. She was out of everything. As her strength emptied completely in front of every watching eye, the power standing over her prepared to decide what none of them could undo. Her breathing no longer sounded like breath. It sounded like something breaking. Each inhale caught halfway inside her chest, jagged and incomplete. Each exhale fell out of her in shallow pieces that never fully emptied her lungs. Her body had forgotten how to do even the simplest survival rhythm. Her shoulders slumped further. Her arms remained lifted only by memory now, not strength. The shaking that had once been violent became slow and weak, like the final tremor of something fading. This was no longer fear fighting to survive. This was fear accepting its limit. The fence pressed hard against her shoulder blades as her weight settled into it. The wood creaked again, louder this time. The sound made several people in the crowd flinch. The lead officer stood fully in her space now, too close. So close that the air between them felt sealed. His shadow swallowed her face. Her eyes searched upward, unfocused. The sharp clarity she had held earlier was gone. In its place was daze, disbelief. That quiet confusion that arrives when the mind cannot accept what the body already knows. Shock was beginning its takeover. The second officer remained off to the side, locked in place by rank fear and consequence. His chest rose sharply. His hands hovered near his own belt, useless in their uncertainty. He looked trapped, Not by law, by timing. The crowd behind him felt the shift into hopelessness. Whispers died, movement slowed. The street grew unnaturally still again, but now it was not tension holding the silence, it was surrender. Her chin lowered slowly, not from shame alone, from exhaustion deeper than muscle. Her eyes drifted downward as if retreating inward, away from the unbearable weight of what stood over her. Her lashes fluttered faintly. The world dimmed at the edges. The moment was stealing her consciousness before it stole anything else. The officer's breathing remained loud, harsh, uncontrolled. His chest rose faster now. His confidence no longer felt dominant, it felt unstable. His control was fraying at the edges under the pressure of witnesses, hesitation, and interruption. But he still did not lower the weapon. The crowd felt the imbalance. Power that hesitates does not always soften. Sometimes it panics. Panic in authority is more dangerous than discipline. A phone near the curb slipped from shaking fingers and hit the ground with a sharp crack. The sound sliced through the silence like glass. Her body jerked involuntarily at the noise. The officer flinched too, just barely, just enough. Another fracture. Her knees buckled again. This time she sank fully to the fence, sliding down several inches. Her palms dragged weakly through the air as her arms failed completely and dropped to her sides. She no longer had the strength to perform compliance. Her humiliation shifted into something deeper than shame. It became erasure. She was no longer perceived as a person in control of her own body. The street now watched a person vanish into powerlessness. The lead officer adjusted his stance. Not back, not away, forward. The line between restraint and irreversible action grew paper thin. Her head tilted slightly to the side as dizziness overtook her. Her eyes struggled to remain open, heavy with the pull of unconsciousness. Her breath came one last shallow time. Everything narrowed. As her body finally slipped beyond the edge of resistance, the truth that could still save her was racing toward this street. Too far away to be seen, and almost too late to matter. The sound that cut through the street did not come from the officers. It did not come from the woman. It came from the crowd. A voice, shaking, urgent, untrained in authority, rose from behind a parked car near the curb. The words rushed out too fast to be clean. Fear threaded through every syllable. The lead officer did not turn, not yet, but his shoulders stiffened. Truth often announces itself before power is ready to hear it. Her head lolled faintly against the fence. Her eyes struggled open again, unfocused and dim. The world swam in dull shapes and shadowed movement. The officer above her blurred at the edges of her vision. She was still conscious. Barely. The second officer snapped his attention toward the crowd for the first time. His eyes found the speaker instantly. His jaw tightened. Recognition sparked, not of the person, but of the implication. The crowd shifted again. More voices followed the first, overlapping in broken urgency. Not shouting, not protesting. Warning. The kind of warning that carries information, dangerous information. The lead officer finally turned his head a fraction. Just enough to register sound, just enough to let doubt knock again. His breathing hitched. Her body remained slack at the fence. Her arms hung uselessly at her sides. Her fingers twitched faintly with involuntary nerve response. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, fragile motions. She looked completely powerless now, which made the warnings more dangerous. Power hates truth most when its victim can no longer defend herself. The second officer stepped forward again, this time without hesitation. He moved into clearer view of both the crowd and his partner. His voice lifted, sharp with urgency now. Not a command, a confirmation, something factual cut through the air. The lead officer recoiled half a step at the sound of it, not back in retreat, back in recognition. The first crack in his authority widened. The street leaned inward as one, phones lifted higher. The atmosphere thickened with shock. Her eyes fluttered again. She sensed, not saw, that something had changed. The weight in the air shifted. The pressure on her chest loosened by the smallest degree. The world was rewriting its story while she could no longer read it. The lead officer's grip tightened on the weapon not with confidence now, but with confusion. His mind raced behind his eyes. The certainty that had driven his pursuit was unraveling rapidly under new knowledge he had not anticipated. He looked again, not at her, at the second officer. The crowd murmured. Names began to slip into the sound, not shouted, not announced. passed between witnesses in urgent fragments, something about who she was, something about what was already in motion beyond this dead-end street. Identity was entering the scene like a delayed impact. Her breath caught weakly, her chest trembled. The officer's stance wavered again. His feet did not move, but his certainty did. For the first time since the chase began, the weapon did not feel like the center of the moment. Information did. The second officer spoke again, slower this time, more deliberate. The urgency shifted into warning with weight behind it. The lead officer's face hardened, not with dominance, but with alarm. The crowd sensed it instantly. Shock ran through the watching eyes like a turning tide. Her body slid another inch lower against the fence. But the force pressing on her world was no longer purely downward. It was splitting. As the truth about who she was began to ripple through the street, the officer who had chased her now stood at the edge of a future he could no longer control. The lead officer's breathing changed. It no longer surged with dominance. It caught with calculation. His eyes stayed on the second officer now, searching his face for confirmation, denial, anything that could restore the clean narrative he had built for himself during the chase. He did not find it. Certainty was no longer available to him. The second officer stood rigid, shoulders squared in a posture he had not held all day. The hesitation that once softened his movements had burned away. In its place stood something heavier, accountability. His gaze did not flinch. He spoke again, measured, controlled, stripped of emotion. The kind of tone used only when words carry consequences far beyond the street. The lead officer's face drained of heat. Not pale, tight. This was no longer about interpretation, it was about implications. Behind them, the crowd shifted again, louder now, less restrained. Phones moved higher, closer, framing tighter angles. A ripple of shock traveled outward as fragments of information stitched together in real time. She was not who they thought. She was not running from them. She had been running toward something else entirely. Her head rested against the fence at a slight angle now. Her breathing remained shallow but steadier than before. The faint tremble in her chest eased as her body slid into exhausted autopilot. She did not yet understand what had changed, but she felt it. The crushing pressure in the air had softened by a fraction. Sometimes the body senses reversal before the mind can name it. The lead officer finally lowered the weapon, only an inch. Not a retreat, a reflex. The movement was small, but it detonated through the street. Gasps broke free. A woman sobbed openly near the driveway now. The second officer did not relax, not yet. He stepped closer to his partner again, but this time not as interruption, as witness. His presence beside the lead officer changed the shape of authority. It no longer stood alone, it stood divided. Authority fractures fastest when it is forced to face itself. The lead officer's jaw flexed hard. He scanned the street once, just once, and met dozens of watching eyes that no longer reflected fear alone. They reflected knowledge. Judgment, record. His confidence thinned visibly now. The silence returned, but it was not surrendering this time. It was waiting. Her lashes fluttered again. Her eyes opened fully for the first time in what felt like minutes. Her vision caught the shift immediately, not the officers, not the crowd, but the subtle lowering of the weapon that had once filled her entire world. Her breath drew in deeper now. The first full breath she had taken in what felt like forever. Air returned before safety did. The lead officer spoke again, but his voice no longer carried the same weight in the street. It felt brittle as it entered the witnessing air. The second officer did not answer immediately. The pause stretched. Everyone waited. Phones kept recording. The lead officer's posture tightened again, but differently now. Not dominant. Defensive. For the first time since the pursuit began, the officer who had chased her now stood on unstable ground and the street was ready to watch him slip. The street no longer felt like a dead end. It felt like a stage. Every phone was steady now. No shaking hands, no frantic adjustments. The witnesses had settled into something heavier than panic, attention. Her shoulders rested weakly against the fence. Her head tilted slightly to the side, breath slow and shallow, but returning to rhythm. Cold sweat cooled along her temples. Her lips parted again as air finally reached places it had been locked out of for too long. She was still fragile, still exposed, but no longer alone in the meaning of the moment. The crowd had stopped watching for danger and started watching for consequence. The second officer took a single deliberate step forward, placing himself firmly between his partner and the woman. Not aggressively, not dramatically, positionally. The lead officer stiffened sharply at the move. His jaw tightened. His chest lifted as if ready to reclaim the moment through posture alone. But posture no longer worked. The weapon dipped another inch, not because of compassion, because of awareness. Awareness weakens power faster than force ever could. Her eyes followed the second officer's movement slowly. The shift in bodies changed the air in front of her. The direct line of threat that had once filled her vision was now partially obstructed. Her breathing deepened just slightly. Her fingers twitched faintly at her sides, life returning in cautious fragments. The crowd leaned in, not in fear, in expectation. Someone near the truck spoke again, clearer this time. The voice carried conviction now, no longer trembling. The words were still fragmented to her ears, but the tone carried certainty. Others answered. Confirmation layered over confirmation. Whatever truth had entered the street was no longer uncertain. It was stabilizing. Once truth stabilizes, lies begin to shake. The lead officer's face tightened further. His gaze flicked once again over the crowd. He saw not obedience this time. He saw documentation. His shoulders rose and fell faster now. The calm he once owned had evacuated the space behind his eyes. Defensiveness replaced dominance. The second officer remained still, a quiet witness in uniform, a boundary made of position, not words. Her chin lifted slightly with effort. Her eyes steadied enough to meet the small space of sky over the officer's shoulder. She did not look at the weapon anymore. She looked beyond it. Her attention had shifted from survival to reality returning. A faint sound moved through the crowd. Not shock, not fear, recognition. The street understood now that this was no longer a question. It was a reckoning beginning to unfold. The lead officer took a half step backward for the first time. Barely visible, but undeniable. A collective inhale moved through the witnesses. The atmosphere shifted completely, from tension to anticipation. Her breath drew in one full, steady pull, the longest breath she had taken since the chase began. Her shoulders dropped a fraction as the weight on her chest loosened again. But the worst of the moment had not yet passed, because reversal does not feel safe at first. It feels unstable. It feels like standing on breaking ice. As the officer stepped back into uncertainty and the crowd leaned into truth, the moment teetered on the edge of full exposure, and what came next would decide who this street would condemn. The street felt narrower again, not from fear, from focus. Every face aligned toward the center now, the two officers, the woman against the fence, the quiet space between authority and truth that was thinning with each second. Her breathing stabilized further, not strong, but steady. Her chest rose and fell with measured timing now, as if her body had decided it was safe enough to stay present. Strength had not returned, but awareness had. Awareness is the first step back from disappearing. The second officer shifted his weight forward again, firm in position. His body language drew an invisible line that had not existed moments earlier. The line did not block the street. It blocked escalation. The lead officer hesitated at it, not physically, internally. His shoulders sagged just enough for the crowd to see fatigue settle where certainty once stood. His weapon remained lowered, not fully down, but no longer centered. Uncertainty had entered his hands. Power shakes hardest when it no longer leads. A man from the crowd stepped forward a half step, then stopped. A woman followed, then another, not interference, witness proximity. They were closing the distance between public and private consequence. Her eyes drifted toward the movement. She saw faces now, not shapes, not blurs, people. Their expressions no longer reflected fear. They reflected recognition. Recognition returns personhood faster than rescue ever could. The second officer turned his head toward the lead officer, spoke low, deliberate. The words were not loud enough for the street to hear, but the impact reached every corner of the moment. The lead officer's face tightened into something sharper than alarm. It hardened into calculation, then tension, then visible loss of ground. His eyes flicked again toward the woman, not with suspicion, with assessment. Who she was, not what she had done, now occupied his focus. The question had finally flipped. Her chest expanded with a deeper breath, not relief, readiness. The crowd murmured again. Names passed between mouths more freely now, not as rumor. As confirmation, whatever had reached the street had now anchored itself in shared understanding. This was no longer assumption. This was identity aligning with consequence. The lead officer took another step back, full this time. His boots scraped softly against gravel as his heels found distance. The sound carried louder than it should have. Retreat always sounds louder than pursuit. The weapon came down to waist level now, still in hand, but no longer ruling the space. The second officer did not move. He stood in stillness like an oath made physical. Her knees trembled faintly as strength began to leak back into her muscles in weak pulses. The dizziness faded enough for her gaze to sharpen. She lifted her head off the fence by a fraction, the first voluntary motion in what felt like a lifetime. Her eyes met the space between both officers, not in challenge, in clarity. She was no longer the unknown, and the street knew it. As the officer's retreat made the first clear sound of defeat, the truth about who she was began to stand fully upright in front of everyone. The lead officer's posture unraveled in visible stages. First, his shoulders softened. Then the rigid angle of his neck loosened. Then, finally, his grip on the weapon lost its mechanical certainty. What remained was not dominance. It was tension without direction. Her body sensed the shift before her mind fully trusted it. The tight coil along her spine unspooled by slow degrees. Her shoulders dropped another inch. Her breathing deepened into steady, fragile rhythm. The body always trusts change before the brain allows it. The second officer stepped forward again, but this time not toward his partner, toward her. Not to touch, not to command. To occupy the empty space where danger had lived nonstop for too long. The distance between the woman and the weapon widened, barely at first, then deliberately. The crowd inclined forward unconsciously as one. The witnesses no longer held breath, they held judgment. Phones stayed high, perfectly still. The moment had crossed from survival into evidence. The lead officer's eyes darted across the street again. He no longer searched for exits in space. He searched for exits in consequence. There were none. Information passed through the crowd faster than sound now, expressions tightening, brows lifting, jaws dropping in synchronized comprehension. Whatever truth had arrived was now undeniable. This was no routine stop gone tense. This was an irreversible mistake under record. Her knees straightened slightly with effort, not fully standing, but no longer collapsing. Strength returned in thin pulses through trembling muscles. Her hands lifted weakly from her sides, not in surrender now, in stabilization. She steadied herself against the fence one last time. She was reclaiming verticality 1 inch at a time. The lead officer took another step back, then another. The movement no longer looked tactical, it looked defensive. The weapon lowered further until it pointed harmlessly at the pavement. A quiet ripple of sound passed through the crowd, not relief, not celebration, something heavier. Recognition of collapse. The second officer turned slightly toward the street, body angled into witness role, not enforcer. He had chosen a side, not against a partner, for truth. Her eyes followed the movement. For the first time since the chase began, she did not feel like a fixed point in someone else's control. She felt like a person again. Personhood returned before justice ever could. The lead officer spoke again. But this time, his voice did not command the space. It attempted to negotiate with it. The street did not answer. Phones did. The quiet choreography of recording hands became the response. Her chin lifted. Her posture straightened further with cautious effort. The fence no longer held her weight, only steadied it. Her expression shifted not to triumph yet, to something quieter and more dangerous. Certainty. As the officer's authority folded in on itself under dozens of unblinking lenses, the reckoning that would decide his fate began to accelerate toward him with unstoppable speed. The street no longer belonged to the officers. It belonged to the phones. The quiet choreography of raised hands and glowing screens became a living network, frames stabilized, angles corrected, zoom tightened. The moment was no longer fragile, it was being transmitted. Her breathing deepened again, slow, measured. Her chest rose with intention now, not survival reflex. Strength had not fully returned to her limbs, but the dizziness had eased enough for her eyes to stay clear. She could finally see. Clarity arrived at the same time as exposure. The second officer stepped fully between her and the lead officer now. His body blocked the remaining idea of threat. not forcefully, decisively, a boundary made visible. The lead officer remained where he stood, 2 full steps farther back than his closest moment. His posture stayed tense, but the tension no longer projected outward. It folded inward. Phones continued to rise. Some witnesses leaned closer. Some stepped aside to give the moment space. But none turned away. Once the world watches, no one escapes unseen. Somewhere beyond the street, the truth began to move faster than feet ever could. Streams connected. Messages fired. Clips sent outward without permission, without mercy. The momentum shifted from local to inevitable. Her face lifted slightly as she sensed it. Not celebration, recognition. The moment was no longer contained. The second officer glanced at the street again, then back at his partner. His posture remained unflinching. He was no longer managing a situation. He was anchoring it. The lead officer swallowed visibly. His jaw flexed again. His eyes flicked to one phone, then another, then another. He realized what no one needed to say. This was no longer about one street. Her knees steadied. Her spine straightened fully for the first time since the chase began. The fence no longer touched her back. She stood on her own, unassisted, unarmed, unthreatening, unbroken. The crowd felt it. A subtle shift passed through the witnesses like synchronized breath. She was upright again. The lead officer did not move. His retreat had finished. Now consequence waited. A distant sound cut faintly into the atmosphere, not loud enough to dominate, but close enough to be felt. Approach. The second officer turned his head slightly toward the sound. Recognition crossed his expression. The crowd stirred in response. Outside authority was entering the frame. Her expression hardened, not with fear now, but with focused calm. What came next would not be decided by speed, panic, or instinct. It would be decided by record, by timing, by what the world had already captured. The lead officer's shoulders sagged another inch. The weapon remained pointed at the ground. Useless now. The street no longer waited to see what he would do. It waited to see what would be done to him. As approaching consequence closed in and the truth raced beyond the street's boundaries, the officer who once hunted her now stood hunted by the evidence himself. The distant sound grew clearer. Not urgent, not chaotic, measured. Authority arriving without haste always carries more weight than authority that rushes. Her breathing held steady as the rhythm approached. The clarity in her eyes no longer wavered. Fear had burned itself out. What remained was alertness, quiet, grounded, unflinching. Fear flees when inevitability arrives. The second officer shifted his stance again, subtly adjusting his position to remain between her and the lead officer. His posture no longer carried uncertainty. It was locked in purpose now, witness, boundary, record. The lead officer remained motionless. His shoulders had sunk lower than before. The tension in his grip had drained into stiffness without direction. The weapon in his hand looked smaller now, not because it had changed, because its meaning had. Power collapses not when it breaks, but when it stops commanding belief. The crowd parted slightly, not in fear, in choreography. The street created a corridor of attention. Phones leaned inward from both sides, framing what was happening with perfect symmetry. She stood at the center of it, breathing, alive, upright. The air felt different now, lighter but charged with weight. A few voices whispered again, not fragments this time. Full sentences passed between witnesses. They no longer sounded uncertain. They sounded settled. The truth had matured. When truth matures, denial shrinks rapidly. The lead officer finally moved. Not forward, not in retreat. Sideways. A subtle adjustment that revealed uncertainty rather than strategy. His eyes searched the shifting faces like someone trying to locate the story he had lost control of. He did not find it. The second officer did not follow his movement. He stayed aligned with her. A silent declaration. The approaching presence drew close now, close enough to change posture, close enough to trigger formality. The crowd held still again, not in surrender. In expectation, her shoulders lifted in a slow, steady inhale. Her hands remained visible by instinct now, though no one demanded it anymore. Her face was calm, not numbed, resolved. Resolution is not relief, it is readiness. The lead officer's jaw tightened one final time. His eyes lowered briefly, not in shame alone, but in calculation gone empty. Whatever path he had thought remained for him had dissolved beneath the weight of record, witnesses, and timing. He was no longer a figure of pursuit. He was the figure being considered, assessed, processed. The second officer turned his head slightly toward the new presence entering the frame. The transition was seamless. Authority exchanged silently. The street did not erupt. It closed ranks. Phones held steady. No one blinked. The power that once pressed down on one woman now pressed inward on one man. The direction of pressure had fully reversed. Her chest lifted again with a controlled breath. Her throat worked as she swallowed the last remnants of shock. Her eyes followed the shift in authority with unbroken focus. The street no longer asked what might happen. It waited to see how destruction would unfold. As the weight of the world's attention finally turned its full force onto the officer who had drawn first judgment, the outcome that would define him forever moved into irreversible reach. The transition did not come with sirens. It came with stillness, the kind that settles only after chaos has exhausted itself. Her breathing remained slow and steady now. The rhythm had returned fully to her chest. Each inhale filled completely. Each exhale left without struggle. Her body no longer trembled. She stood without assistance. Unarmed, unthreatening, unbreakable, survival had finished its work. The final exchange of authority unfolded quietly. No raised voices. No sudden movements. Just posture, timing, and the invisible weight of record shifting from one set of shoulders to another. The second officer stepped aside for the first time, not from her, for her. A clear path opened where danger once stood. The lead officer did not follow. He remained where consequence had placed him. His weapon was fully lowered now, not because he chose humility, because control had already left him. True defeat arrives long before punishment does. The witnesses did not cheer. They did not shout. They only watched, not in fear, not in shock, but with the steady gravity of people who know they will never forget what they have seen. Phones remained lifted, not as shields, as testimony. She took one cautious step forward, then another, not hurried, not tentative, intentional. Her feet touched pavement that no longer felt hostile, her shoulders lowered fully. Her arms rested naturally at her sides again. She passed through the space that had once threatened to end her life. The crowd parted without being asked. The street made way for truth without instruction. She did not look back at the officer. She did not need to. The direction of the story had already changed. The weight that once pressed her inward now pressed downward somewhere else entirely. On record, on consequence, on permanence. Her steps carried her forward into open space where fear used to live. Her spine straightened with every inch she moved away. Her face did not hold triumph. It held survival. It held clarity. It held the quiet that comes after injustice loses its grip. Victory does not always announce itself. It sometimes simply continues breathing. Behind her, the moment concluded without spectacle, not with force, with procedure, with documentation, with the long, irreversible machinery that follows public truth. The crowd slowly lowered their phones, not because the story was over, because it had already been secured. She reached the far edge of the gathered witnesses and stopped. For just 1 second, she turned her head slightly not toward anyone in uniform, but toward the faces that had watched her vanish and then reappear. Her eyes met theirs. No challenge, no gratitude, just presence. Then she kept walking, away from the street that would never forget her name, away from the moment that no longer belonged to her. The world beyond the block waited quietly to receive the truth that had already outrun her. Power can chase, threaten, and dominate, but it always collapses when the truth is finally allowed to stand upright in public.